Welcome to another episode of Faith Gateway Live. My name is John McClure, and I am the curator to a pastor to pastor, that part of our Faith Gateway website that is targeted to help pastors grow in their personal life and become more and more effective in developing churches that are healthy and are affecting the world as well as caring for their flocks. I have the privilege of being your host today, and I'm especially privileged to introduce to you Larry Osborne, who is the person that we're going to be interviewing. As you probably know, Larry is a very well-known teaching pastor. He's the lead pastor at the North Coast Church, which is in North San Diego County. North Coast is widely regarded as one of the most influential and, in fact, innovative churches in the United States today. Get an idea of some of the things that they have innovated. They have pioneered the first video venues that now, of course, are touching tens of thousands of churches across the country. He has created a small group model that has affected, again, thousands and thousands of churches. The multi-site movement really has its genesis with Larry and his church. Larry's books include Sticky Teams and Sticky Church. Accidental Pharisees and 10 Dumb Things That Smart Christians Believe. Today, we're going to be looking at his newest book, just published in October, Innovation's Dirty Little Secret, subtitled Why Innovators Succeed Where Others Fail. And by the way, as you're listening in, we would like to hear from you. If you've got questions you want to raise with Larry, please tweet them in to Faith Gateway, hashtag Innovation Secrets. And they'll come up on my little board here, and I'll raise them with Larry, and we'll have an opportunity to chat about them. Well, welcome, Larry. Just delighted to have you here.
Delighted to be with you.
Fun to chat with you for a few minutes beforehand and find out that you actually relax by working. And have a lot of influence within the business community, in fact, larger communities in the culture beyond the church. Could you share a little bit about that as we begin?
Well, it's kind of a strange thing, frankly. I started doing ministry. I was 18 years old, 19 years old, as a new Christian. And over time, what I found happening was, especially as our church grew quite large, I would get business leaders, particularly entrepreneurial business leaders, in a startup mode and maybe 40 million or so top line, which is a small business, but still pretty big business in most of our eyes. And they would come to me for some leadership stuff. And what I discovered is leadership is leadership. Solomon's advice in the book of Proverbs applies to those of us that are leading a church, tiny startup to massive, and it applies to someone who's leading anything. And so that really was the genesis of it, and it was fun because as I rubbed shoulders with those folks, they were always teaching me a ton of stuff as well, and that's why I say it's one of my hobbies. I love to be a little Renaissance-y, and so it takes me into worlds outside of the church world where all of my education, all of my professional experience is, and I'm able to give them some stuff they haven't seen, and they always give me something that I can bring back with a little bit more wisdom as a leader here. So it's kind of funny. I get paid for doing things that I would pay for, but don't let that out, okay?
Okay. Well, it's very exciting, and exciting to talk to somebody who is really an innovator and has really tried things that have worked and obviously are now working all across the United States and many, many countries all around the world. So let's dive into this whole book on innovation, and obviously the first question is what is innovation's dirty little secret?
Well, innovation's dirty little secret is that most innovations fail. They always have, and they always will. But that's not what you get when you read most books on innovation, or you go to most conferences, or even people that have a reputation of being an innovator. They tend to always talk about their successes, or maybe one or two particular failures that taught them some lessons, and then they go on. But the truth of the matter is, every successful, I like to call it serial innovator, has a ton of failures around them, and what separates them is they understand the high likelihood of failure, consciously or unconsciously. As they innovate, they're always ready to make those mid-course corrections or to pull the parachute and bail out. And there's just not a lot of literature out there in the research or conventional wisdom, because the only people we ever hear from are those who succeeded. Somehow nobody buys the book or asks somebody to speak on a platform who failed miserably. And so there's a whole lot of thought out there that, well, all you got to do is something really risky and crazy, especially as Christians, for God. And when you go out on a limb, he'll have to save you. And we've got all these stories of that, and that's just not really the way it works. The dirty little secret is most of my innovations have failed as well. Always have and always will.
Well, if that's the case, if most of them fail, how in the world do you survive? What's the secret to being able to continue going even while you're trying things that are failing?
Yeah. Well, like I said, it's either consciously or unconsciously that people do this, because there's some unconscious competence. Imagine a baseball player. There's guys who can hit 340 but can't teach someone else to do it, and there's guys who can hit 320 and also teach other people how to do it. So not everybody's aware of it, but here's what they all do when you backward engineer it, or if they're the conscious competent. They understand their exit strategy is just as important as their implementation strategy. And serial innovators go into everything they do knowing how they're going to get out of it if it's the stupidest idea they ever had, and they're quick to pull that parachute if needed. Everybody else thinks, no, we have to faith and just keep moving on, and they go right off the cliff.
That's such an interesting position, because most people would say, wow, we can't be thinking negative. We've got to have a positive approach here. So they give no thought to what they're going to do when it fails. And if 9 out of 10 of their ideas fail, they're going to be constantly under the drag of, wow, what terrible leadership.
Yeah.
And that idea of an exit strategy, can you describe what you mean by that?
Well, we've all heard the little cliche, we burn the boats, which means we've made such a strong commitment, there's no way to go back. And people will talk about, in the business world, taking out a loan on their house, and they're maxing their credit cards and loan from their parents, and then they became some huge, massive business. What they don't tell are all the stories of people who went bankrupt and now are too ashamed to talk to their folks and everybody they borrowed money from. Well, in ministry, we have that same idea that it's almost a lack of faith to have a backup strategy. But whenever I hear people talk about we've burned the boats, I always wonder, do you know where that story comes from? It comes from the explorer Cortez, who had all of his boats burned when he landed, so that none of the sailors would be able to get on those boats and go back. Well, it sounds great. Yeah, full commitment, go for it. Well, what they miss is what I always ask, do you know what happened to Cortez? He was massacred, and all of his men were, because they had no stinking boats to get on. And so, really, at the end of the day, there's just a lot of dribble about being fully committed by people who have a history of mid-course changes left and right. So that's what I mean, an exit strategy, because if you don't have it, you're going to be dead meat.
So really, the biggest error that anyone can make has to do with talking. Use the idea you should never speak of change, but rather something else.
Yeah, I always talk about the language influences everything. The subtitle of this book was almost Why Everything You've Heard About Change and Innovation is Wrong. Because we get all this information that we're supposed to make sure everybody buys in, we're supposed to explain everything we're doing. Well, the more you do that, the less room you have for mid-course corrections. And on a rocket to the moon, the engineers have figured out incredible detail about everything they're doing, and yet about every 38 seconds there's a gyroscope change that's being done, which is why they get to the moon. And real innovations always take on a life of their own, and change always runs into some unintended consequences. So it's not only the exit strategy, but it's building in that flexibility so that when what you thought was going to happen doesn't happen, you've got the ability to make a mid-course correction. So to me, that's the most important thing, is treat it as an experiment. People let you, first of all, you're never a loser when your experiment fails. But when
Yeah.
your new oversold initiative fails, you're a loser and you lose credibility. When you say we're going to try something for a period of time and it doesn't work and you get out of it, everybody applauds you for having tried things. Plus, you've learned one more thing that doesn't work.
So basically, don't ever announce a change, but instead announce we're going to try a little experiment here. And you
Yep.
talked about doing that on the fringes. What did you mean by that?
Well, Jesus said something that was very important about change, and there was a part of what he said that was well known to me and lots of people, but there was another part that people miss. He said that new wine, or change or innovation, if you will, because he was explaining why people were responding as they did to his ministry, some accepting and the religious leaders turning it away. And what he said is new wine has to go into new wineskins. What
Yes.
we often miss is he also said, no one who has tasted of the old likes the new. And early on in my ministry, I used to think if people love Jesus, they'd learn to like a subwoofer for the kingdom. But the truth of the matter is that didn't happen. And I had to just repent and say something was wrong with me, assuming everybody was a big L leader willing to do whatever it takes. Not that everybody was a follower of Jesus just grabbing the oar and trying to help out, if you will. And so the idea of innovating and changing around the fringe has two things that it does. First of all, it positions things as an experiment, and they work, everybody jumps aboard. But the second thing is it allows you to protect the past while you're creating the future. Because if you
Yes.
presume upon your past gains and try to create the future, let me give you a couple business examples. Your J.C. Penney, with a mess it recently went through. Your Nordstrom's a number of years ago when it tried to become hip and thought all the old boomers that were buying stuff from them would continue to buy. In both cases, they said, well, we're going to create the future, but, you know, all the past, they're all with us. Well, that we've all seen that in churches that say we're making some big change, but we don't worry, everybody that was with us will still be with us.
Let me just take a second to remind our listeners here of the importance of getting questions from you. If you'd like to raise a question with Larry, would you please tweet it into Faith Gateway at #InnovationSecrets. We'd just love to hear from you. Larry, you also talk about three characteristics that you see in what you called serial innovators, people that do make it. And you talk about a special kind of insight. I'm interested in your developing that a little bit.
Well, what I've noticed in serial innovators, it was funny talking to my folks one time, just from a little kid, like, yeah, Larry, you were like that. And a guy named Joel Barker is the person who put some of the best literature out on this. And to him, I owe some of the seed thoughts at the beginning, like, oh, yeah, you're so right. But people who seem to come up with ideas that everybody else at the beginning thinks won't work, but does work, the three traits that are most common to them is first of all, they have a special kind of insight. And really what they do is they mentally model outcomes in their head very quickly. It's almost like a chess player. I used to play some chess at a decent level, not a competitive level, but I could see some things that people I could regularly beat couldn't see, a move or so ahead. But then I would play somebody who's really good, and it was amazing how far ahead they could see. And what they're doing is they just have this ability spatially in their head to mentally model various outcomes. And that's one of the things that serial innovators have a history of doing. It's almost like they see around the corner and they're seeing the unintended consequences that the rest of us can miss. A second thing is they have a unique kind of courage. They trust their mental model. It's not a leap of faith in the sense of doing something crazy. It's a leap of faith in the sense that Noah built a boat because God specifically told him to, and he could see it was God telling him to. Abraham went up to the mountain with his son Isaac because there was no question this was what God wanted. So it's a courage that isn't quite as courageous as it looks like because the mental model is so clear. And along with that insight and unique kind of courage comes an extraordinary flexibility. They never fall in love with the first draft of their ideas. They're quick and they're open to try something else.
Let me just interrupt again with a important thought. All of Larry Osborne's products are on a special sale right now with Faith Gateway. You can save an extra 15% off using the code SECRET, and for the next 48 hours, a total of up to 40% off on your books, Larry. So we hope that you'll contact us. Now, I've got the first little tweet here from Michael Gray, and he is asking the question, what level of leadership should be on board with the change?
Great, great. Well, every major change or significant innovation, which is a kind of, it's just a new change rather than a mid-course change, you usually need a John the Baptist with you, somebody that can, the newer you are, especially into an environment that can introduce and back your play and support it. But every major change needs a small group of champions, and within every group of people, there are respected champions, and they might hold an official position or they might not. You make a big change when you only look at official positions, because sometimes the tribal chief of a group of people doesn't have an official role, but whenever they say, yeah, that's okay, everybody goes, well, it's okay. And whenever they say, shake their head and go, no, 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 everybody backs off. So a prudent leader will know who those key players are. I've got one or two on my board. When our church was smaller, at this size right now, it's a little bit different, but when our church was smaller and most people knew the leaders, there were always a couple of people. And the key thing to do is to get them aboard. As Solomon says, a cord of three is not easily broken. And that support can help you get permission. What you don't need is broad buy-in, and what you can't get, despite all the literature on it, is you can't get broad buy-in because over half the people will be against an innovation and change until they know who else is for it. So trying to get it on the front end is an absolute exercise in frustration. But people will give you permission to try something as long as a few other people that have those chips and that high respect as kind of a tribal chief say, yeah, this is worth trying.
So that respected champion is really crucial in moving from just talking about an experiment to actually saying, you know, we're gonna try this a little bit more broadly.
Yeah, it's actually important in the experiment size if the idea is really crazy. I remember when we started the lecture lab model of small groups that we were doing. At that point, nobody was really doing it. We're going way back. And the fact that all my elders and staff were for, hey, let's try a sermon series, which notice, we wanted to change forever, but it was presented as we're going to do a sermon series in which our small groups are going to be a lecture lab kind of approach to it, and then everybody's willing to do it. If it was just my idea, I would have had more resistance. And now, having been somewhere 34 years, lo and behold, I wake up, I'm the respected champion. But for most of us, we're not at that point in our ministry or career. So I'm looking back to another point.
Rodney Kennedy has another question. What are some things that innovators can do when they get stuck?
Well, the first thing is try to figure out where your opposition is coming from. But before I say that, there's an important principle of innovation. Innovation for innovation's sake has no value. You know, the people who have, well, I call it leadership ADD, they're always talking about growing stale and the need to try new things and all of this sort of stuff. But the truth of the matter is the only innovation that is of any value is that which moves the mission forward. And so underneath this question, Rodney, if we were face-to-face, I would have asked you, well, what do you mean by that? Because I would want to free you up from the idea you've always got to be innovating. There are seasons in my leadership where we're just working the system and working it really well. Most great organizations are not changing 180 degrees every time you turn around. But what they are doing is they're seizing opportunities when they are there, and they're removing the roadblocks that show up at certain times and just sabotage them. So some of the things that sabotage innovation is groupthink. It'll kill you every time. If you're trying to innovate with a group above 3 people, creative ideas are almost always 1 to 3. The best ones, frankly, more often on the 3 side than the 1 side. And then critiquing those ideas is the 7 to 12. But how often a whole staff tries to get together and say, let's create. No, we can critique a first draft at that size. Surveys are another thing that'll kill you because of their anonymity. I'm always telling people you weigh opinions, you don't count them. So you should jump at the whisper of a wise man, and you should ignore the shouts of a fool. But most of our ways of gathering information allow us no ability to know where it's coming from, wisdom or foolishness. Again, that desire for buy-in could kill you because you're never going to get it. And then you can also get stuck because your past successes can cause you to think that they're always going to be there. It's Walt Disney almost going down after Disney died because for years, decades literally, they kept asking, what would Walt do? And they only knew what Walt would do in the 1940s and the early 50s. They had no idea what he would do in the late 60s and early 70s.
Another question, this one from Warren Bird. How can church leaders create the best environment for innovative circumstances?
Well, again, I think number one, do not forget the importance of protecting your past gains. So if you're a startup ministry, all you've got is a future to create. Roll the dice and go for it. But somewhere around year 3 or 4 into any organization, anything, you have that past to protect. So you need a champion of the past. At the same time, then, as you're trying to be innovative, what you want to release is, in the business world, they sometimes call it skunk works. Off to the side, the ability to explore and to try things. And then those things that are winners and not the failures, you bring them in closer to the center. So you always, you need permission to fool around with crazy ideas at the side. Or if it's a whole church thing, like just again, decades ago, almost 30 years now, when we made some small group things that we have done, nobody else was doing it, and so I couldn't do it off to the side with 1 or 2 groups, but what I could do is say, we're just going to try it with a defined end. 7 weeks from now, we're going to end it. Well, I hoped, I planned, and sure enough, it was that way, or our team planned. It wasn't only my idea. We thought we'd do it forever, but we didn't have to tell everybody on that on the front end. And then when it bombed, we could say, yeah, we thought it wouldn't work.
Larry, as we think about innovation and keeping it on target, you comment on having a great mission statement. How do you weave those together, a great mission statement together with being innovative?
Well, the problem is that most mission statements are more politically correct than they are honest. As they're kind of spelled out, they have everything in the kitchen sink thrown into them because we don't want anybody to criticize it. The way I talk about it in ministry is we preach the body of Christ, but we don't really believe the body of Christ. And so we don't let any one church be out of balance. But a true mission statement that aligns giftedness and passion is going to dial in very specifically on a few things, and that'll help with innovation because you will always know, does this help us reach that bullseye that God has called us to reach? But if you've got this mushy mission statement, we're going to change the world for Christ, or it's so long nobody can remember it, so everything in the kitchen sink is included in it, then every idea will fit. So we find at North Coast there's a lot of really good ideas other organizations, ministries, or churches might want to do, but it doesn't have our name on it because it's not what we're called to do. Let me give you one example. Church planting is a rather important thing. North Coast has raised up a bunch of church planters, but we've never had a church planting arm. And I've had people get on me for that. Well, the fact of the matter is, we were called to do something else, and we are a resource to all kinds of church planting groups and organizations. A major resource to them, and we just felt like, well, why in the world do we have to have one with our brand tagged on it? Why don't we just come alongside all the things that Jesus is doing in lots of places? And so that really helps us when everybody wants to stir up and get a North Coast version of it. We say, no, this is our mission statement, and we are coming alongside others and helping them be successful.
Excellent. Again, I just want to remind you listening here, Larry Osborne's products, all of them are available right now for an extra 15% off. Using the code SECRET, next 48 hours you can get up to 40% off your total. Now we have another question here from John Fennis. Can you give a real-life example of an exit strategy that you have used? I'm sure you can.
Well, first of all, when we started our sermon-based small groups, lecture lab model that kind of went off from almost all the other models that were around then, especially because we emphasize relationships as a core and then mission out of it, rather than mission as a core and relationships flowing out of it. The exit strategy is we're going to do this tied to a sermon series for 7 weeks. Didn't work. We just never would have gone back to it. When we first did our video venues, all we did was we had a little room that seated 89 people. We were packed out. No more. We had no additional time slots or energy that we could use, and so we had to turn an overflow room into a reward instead of a punishment for being late. And I thought that teaching works very well on a screen and nothing else does. So as opposed to a overflow room, let's record a Saturday night service, intentionally show it delayed the next morning. And at that point, we added some Starbucks coffee into the venue, which was a rare thing back then. Danishes and stuff when we had no food in the sanctuary back then. So things have changed in our culture. But all we did was we bought a projector, a decent screen, and grabbed a little room, and we tried it. And the exit strategy was all we asked for was the yes votes. We were running maybe 3,200 people then, and I had 73 sign up, so we went to double services. At 89, it's 160, 190 people showed up that first week. It was full, both services. Well, if I had 190, that means I had 3,010 who thought it was the stupidest idea ever. So our exit strategy was we'll just do it with those who like it and we'll bail out. We recently tried that with a new venue we did. We thought everybody was all excited to have a venue of where did my easily singable songs go? Because, you know, the newer songs are harder to sing. We tried it. Didn't work very well. We pulled the plug and thanked everybody for trying it, because we said we're going to try it. We didn't say we're going to launch it. And launching something that fails is not a good deal.
You know, that is such an important insight, just the whole feel of the idea. We're going to try something. It may work, it may not. It's okay. It just makes change so much easier. And it makes failure okay. You know, you say, well, we tried it, didn't work well, we went on something else. Well, friends, this is going to conclude our time with Larry today, and I want to just mention again all of Larry's books and all products that are available through his ministry. You can save an extra 15% off using the code SECRET. The next 48 hours, up to 40% off. Larry, this has been a privilege for me. Thanks so much. Really enjoyed meeting you, and hope sometime I get to meet you face to face.
Great. Same here. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.